You may recall that in episode 34 of the Random Trade Review, I covered the career of writer Jeff Loeb when I talked about his landmark Batman storyline, Hush. Now, in that episode, I mentioned a storyline that Loeb had done with an artist named Tim Sale called Batman: The Long Halloween.
The story, which covered the early crime-fighting days of the Dark Knight, was not technically the first time Loeb and Sale worked together. That was actually a book relaunching another DC property, The Challengers of the Unknown. But it would set a template for the type of story the two would specialize in, retelling the early days of a superhero. Long Halloween and its sequel, Dark Victory, would go on to inspire elements of Christopher Nolan's Batman films. Another book the two worked on was Superman for All Seasons. That brought back elements of Clark Kent's life in Kansas that had been all but dropped in his post-Crisis on Infinite Earths relaunch in the late 80s. That series would actually be used as a template for the long-running Smallville television show.
Loeb and Sale's specialty of retelling the early days of superheroes would not just be limited to DC, as the two would do several stories from Marvel. However, their unique work from Marvel would be that it featured something of a color motif.
The idea was that the color would work on two separate layers. For example, the third of these color series, Hulk Gray, obviously referenced the fact that the Hulk was famously colored gray in his first appearance, but it also played off the fact that the character walked a moral gray line between hero and anti-hero. Another book, Captain America White, covered Steve Rogers being unfrozen from the ice that he was trapped in at the end of World War II, but it also played off the idea that Captain America was a pure, unadulterated, good, caring soul. In other words, he was lily white.
Loeb and Sale's first work on these, color books for Marvel would be Daredevil Yellow, a title that played off the fact that not only did Daredevil have a yellow costume when he debuted, but also the fact that the man colloquially known as the Man Without Fear does occasionally get afraid. This is Daredevil Yellow.
Matt Murdock swings through the streets of New York City. He's out on patrol, but his mind is elsewhere as he psychically composes a letter to his lost love, Karen Page. It's then that Daredevil happens across Fogwell's gym, where his father, Batlin Jack Murdock, used to train. The atmosphere, the dust, the smell of talcum powder and boxing gloves slowly brings Matt back into the mists of time. Matt was finishing up law school at Columbia University with his best friend and roommate, Franklin Foggy Nelson. Things were going well for both Murdock men, as Jack had been on a winning streak ever since signing on with a new promoter named Sweeney, though Sweeney had a more dubious nickname, The Fixer. Matt was following through on his promise to his father not to be an uneducated pug who had to become a journeyman boxer to make ends meet. He was following through and going to law school and becoming something of himself. Matt and Foggy take in Jack's next big fight against Carl Crusher Creel, with the winner getting a shot at the champion. Creel dominates most of the fight, though Jack is still battling. Suddenly from the crowd, Sweeney yells to Jack to go down. The win streak ends here, all but confirming several suspicions about Jack's winning streak. But Jack is having none of it, though, as he rises and drops Creel with a thunderous bolo punch. Creel fails to answer the 10 count, and Matt celebrates with Foggy. Afterwards, Jack gives Matt his yellow boxing robe, promising to meet the two back at his apartment. Matt and Foggy leave as Sweeney and his number one, a pistachio-chomping thug named Slade, enter the room. Back at the apartment, Matt and Foggy fall asleep when Matt is bolted to consciousness by the sound of a gunshot. He leaps through the window and takes off in the direction the shot came from. Matt already knows what happens as he arrives. Jack Murdock has been killed. The only other thing Matt notices is the heavy aroma of pistachio nuts in the air. Even though both Matt and Foggy can place Sweeney and Slade as the last two people to see Jack Murdock alive, Sweeney hires a slick lawyer who argues that there just isn't enough evidence. After all, why would Sweeney kill one of the boxers who just won a title opportunity? The judge agrees and throws the case out of court despite Matt's vociferous objections. Matt follows through on the promise he made to his father and finishes law school. However, the case still gnaws at the back of his mind. As Matt returns to his apartment and finds Jack's old boxing robe, it comes to his mind that now he has to follow through on a promise to himself. Now is the time to fight. He begins tearing apart the robe and restitching it together in the form of a devil.
Yes, again, Daredevil's costume when he first started out was actually yellow, not red. He wouldn't get the classic red costume until issue 7 of his series.
Dubbing himself Daredevil after a derogatory nickname bestowed upon him by the bullies of his youth, Matt crashes into the Fixer's hideout. He takes down some low-level goons, which draws the attention of Sweeney and Slade. He dodges the gunfire of both men and pushes them down a flight of stairs. He then corners Slade, grabs his gun, and tells him to testify, or else. The Fixer tries to escape, but Daredevil pursues him down into the subway tunnels. The strain proves to be too much, and the Fixer ends up suffering a fatal heart attack. As all of this has been happening, Foggy is back at the newly opened law office of Nelson and Murdoch, interviewing potential secretaries. They're all terrible. There's a chain smoker, there's a mom with a vomiting kid, not to mention all of them keep calling the law firm Murdoch and Nelson instead of Nelson and Murdoch. Referring to them alphabetically like most law firms refer to their partners. As Matt returns to the office, Foggy introduces them to their new secretary, Karen Page.
Now, this origin might be a little confusing to some people, as, well, every major media adaptation of Daredevil is actually borrowed from a different retelling of Matt Murdock's origin, a storyline called The Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. Now, we're going to be covering The Man Without Fear in more detail in a later episode, but I'm going to touch on what was one of the main differences here, which is that Battling Jack Murdock was actually killed when Matt was about, I'd say, 12 years old, and he had been blinded for, well, about a year. Instead of this storyline, which is actually from the original Daredevil comic book origin, where Matt was in college. And, well, I actually prefer the original comic book origin to Frank Miller. I mean, this way we don't have this weird 10 to 13 year wilderness period where no one was raising Matt while he was blind.
It doesn't take long for Nelson and Murdoch to land their first client, and it's a big one, the Fantastic Four, complete with the Thing crashing through their office window. Reed Richards has some papers, including the lease for the Baxter building and some patents, that he wants Nelson and Murdoch to go over and make sure there are no loopholes that can be exploited. He also puts them on retainer and covers the cost to replace the window. After the heroes leave, Foggy begins celebrating and dancing with Karen. He then suggests the three go out for drinks at the Marlin, the dive bar Matt and Foggy frequented during their college years. Matt arrives at the bar to find Foggy and Karen in the back room playing billiards. Matt enters the game against a group of bro-douches who are immediately cracking Helen Keller jokes. Matt smirks and mockingly repeats the jokes as he begins mopping the floor with the dopes, to Karen's amazement. Hours go by, and Foggy takes the now sloshed Karen home while Matt stays behind. He knows the jerks from before are waiting in the alley behind the bar, and they're not too happy to have been hustled by a, quote, blind man, unquote. Matt isn't fazed, though, as he begins mopping the floor with the bro-douches again. A few days later, Matt visits Slade, who's on death row. The DA asked Murdoch to come down and talk to the hitman about who really employed him, as the fixer was too low-level a hood to be working entirely on his own. Even with the promise of his death sentence being commuted to life, Slade won't talk. Matt would later attend Slade's execution, carrying a bag of pistachio nuts as he did so. When Matt returns to the office, he finds Foggy talking with a new prospective client named Grace, who is apparently being blackmailed by someone. She refuses to give up any more information and soon leaves out of fear of being found out. Her fears prove to be quite true, as it turns out the man in question is Leland Owlsley, aka the Owl.
Leland Owlsley was a master Wall Street stockbroker, which naturally means he was actually running a Ponzi scheme. But after he'd been arrested, he began ingesting a serum that, coupled with his naturally hollow bones, gave him the ability to glide over short distances. Owlsley, dubbing himself the Owl after his nickname, the Owl of Wall Street, also employs several razor-sharp talons that he wears on his forearms like gauntlets. Now, the Owl goes on to become something of a crime figure in New York City. Not quite on the level of the Kingpin, but he's sort of right up there, just on the strata below the Kingpin.
The Owl wants to put Nelson and Murdoch on retainer. There's just one problem. He has no legal documents containing his actual name, probably because of what would turn up due to a background check. As this is happening, Daredevil soon finds himself in a fight with the living battery Electro. The villain was trying to break into the Baxter building as Matt was there to drop off some papers for Reed to sign, only to find the Fantastic Four were out. The fight carries over to Radio City Music Hall, where the two interrupt the Rockettes at practice. Daredevil manages to subdue Electro by striking one of the sprinklers with his billy club, shorting out the villain. Daredevil then spent the rest of the time flirting with the dancers.
Daredevil's billy club is a multitasking tool which not only acts as the walking cane that Matt Murdock uses in a civilian persona, but it also contains a miniature recording system, a grappling hook, and several highly pressurized rubber spots, which he uses as a ricochet to knock out criminals from behind.
Daredevil goes swinging by the office where Karen spots him while taking dictation for Foggy. She's in awe, describing what she saw to Foggy as Matt enters. Both men goof on Karen, calling Daredevil her boyfriend. When Karen mentions she actually is single, Foggy suggests going bowling, and Matt is willing to join the two. At the bowling alley, Foggy has some success while Matt struggles, forcing Karen to lend a hand. Still, all have fun. The next day, when Foggy returns to the office, Matt explains that Karen volunteered to run some paperwork to the Owl, which is good as it will give Foggy enough time to work up his marriage proposal to Karen. Things go from awkward to worse when Karen doesn't return from the Owls. The address their prospective client gave them turned out to be an abandoned building, and now Foggy is worried. Matt then changed into his Daredevil outfit and climbed to the top of a building spire where he used his enhanced hearing senses to try to locate Karen. Karen is being held in a birdcage at a building located near the East River. The Owl plans on holding her for extortion purposes on Nelson and Murdoch, just like the blackmail he used on Grace to bring the attorneys in. Daredevil slips in while it appears that the Owl has left the room and frees Karen. The two playfully flirt as Karen starts to head for the exit. It's then that the Owl attacks, forcing Karen to take cover. Daredevil is swooped up and forced to fight free. The Owl tries to flee through a window, but Daredevil gives pursuit and manages to bring the criminal down in the middle of the East River. However, a sweep turns up no body. The next day, Karen regales Matt with the story of Daredevil saving her, even going as far as to enact the battle fight in front of him. She stumbles and falls into Matt's arms, and it's then that Foggy enters the office to find the two staring into each other's eyes, and comes to the realization that he never had a chance with Karen.
Yeah, I know, Matt's blind, so the whole looking into each other's eyes thing doesn't really work. You're just going to have to go with it.
Over the next few weeks, Karen and Matt begin to grow closer to each other, and Foggy begins to grow more irritable. It's then that Matt and Foggy find out the courts have appointed them defender of a man named Zebediah Kilgrave. Matt and Karen go to the jail to speak with their new client. At the jail, they find out that Kilgrave is not only completely colored purple, but he also won't be needing a trial as he tells the guard to release him. Kilgrave then leaves with Karen. Due to his blindness, Matt seems unaffected by Kilgrave's charms.
This is a retelling of the debut story of longtime villain The Purple Man, a Croatian physician turned super spy who was doused with a chemical that not only turned his hair and skin completely purple, but also gave him psychic mind manipulation powers. And if you know his backstory with another prominent Marvel hero, Jessica Jones, you know that Kilgrave is not above using said manipulation powers to coerce women into performing sexual favors on him.
Matt changes into Daredevil and goes after Kilgrave, but the Purple Man just turns the cops on the hero and gets into a taxi with Karen. The two make their way to a suite at the Plaza Hotel, where Kilgrave has Karen begin disrobing. Daredevil commandeers a room service order and uses it to break into the room. Kilgrave has Karen put her clothes back on and orders her to walk over the edge of the terrace. Daredevil swoops down and catches Karen as Kilgrave's psychic grip is loosened. The two begin flirting and make a date for later as they get to safety, with Karen suggesting that red might actually be a more appropriate color for someone named Daredevil. Daredevil then wraps a flag around Kilgrave before he can mind control the police again. The next day at the office, Foggy concedes defeat to a befuddled Matt when a starry-eyed Karen comes in. She begins referring to her employers by their first names instead of Mr. Nelson and Mr. Murdoch, which she had been doing previously. She also asks if she can get off early for her date with Daredevil. Returning to the present, Matt concludes his letter to Karen with the news that he purchased Fogwell's gym, renaming it Batlin Jacks in honor of his father. Matt hired Melvin Potter to be the trainer for this place. Melvin used to be the villain called the Gladiator, but he's been trying to go straight and deserves a second chance. With that, he comes to terms with the fear of losing your loved ones, admitting that it's okay to go on as long as you never truly forget them.
And so concludes Daredevil Yellow. How is it? Well, first and foremost, on the plus side, you have to mention Tim Sale's artwork. I really do love the sort of watercolored motif to this that has kind of halcyon innocence to it. And throw on top of that Loeb's interaction with the characters in this. It's very reminiscent of screwball comedies like His Girl Friday. I also like that they utilized a lot of the villains from this period. They didn't go in and throw the Kingpin or Bullseye or even Elektra into this. They kind of stuck to more, well, traditional Daredevil villains from that time period with the Owl and the Purple Man, and there's a reference to another low-level villain called the Matador. That being said, the story isn't perfect. First off, Foggy's characterization, while funny, is kind of demeaning to that character. I mean, Karen has shown no romantic inclination towards him at all, and yet he's ready to propose marriage to her? Even for the 1960s, that seems a little rash. And, well, I know I didn't mention a big fact about Karen and what happens to her. We're going to be covering that story at a later point, so I was trying not to touch on it too much, though I have mentioned it a couple of times in earlier episodes of this show if you've gone back and watched any of them. That being said, both of those are really kind of nitpicks. I'm going to give Daredevil Yellow an A. And with that, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
you can help support my work at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions, where you can request a trade to be placed in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box.